Hey guys, well welcome back to this week's episode of The American Landman. Hey, recently I took a comment from one of you viewers, and he was watching one of my videos and he asked me, how do I identify a good piece of property that I can make mega millions on when I go ahead and sell it? And I thought to myself, well, hey, I'll take a stab at that, and you can find my comment. But I think if I could identify that, I'd bottle that process itself and I'd make millions just selling the secret sauce. But I don't think it exists. But I think I have identified 5 key ways that can help you kind of narrow down your options, start to identify some properties that might be a good investment. So if you're interested in buying property and probably speculating for a future equity gain, I hope this helps you on today's episode of The American Landman. Okay, well, let's jump into this topic. Well, the first thing is the idea that this gentleman asked me about is purely speculation. And my little disclaimer here, I don't have the market cornered on answering all the questions. I don't have a crystal ball. So if you're out there looking for this type of investment, hoping to gain on the backside when you sell it, you're becoming a speculator, because there's so many factors that can limit or interfere or affect the ability to buy a property low and sell it high and make millions in the process. This is what everybody's after, but it's not as easily done. If it was, everybody do it. But I have identified, I think, 5 key factors that can help you start to hone in on your decision process as you're looking for properties and kind of guide you along. I think it's always good to have a process. So here we go. 5 ways to help identify a good looking property. Opportunity number 1, geographic travel corridors. I've mentioned this before in some of my other videos, and let's just dive into a little bit more what we're talking about. In your area that you're looking to buy a property, I want you to check out a map. I want you to get on Google Earth or MapRight or OnX Hunt and look at a metro area. In my area, that would be the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, where I live on the eastern side of that area. When you look at Minneapolis-St. Paul, you've got I-94 going out the northwest corner. You've got Interstate I-94 coming in, and you've got Highway 36 leaving out. You've got 35 going north. You've got 3 or 4 well-driven, well-traveled geographic travel routes escaping the city and feeding into the city. Those are the areas you want to key in on. That's where people are moving, they're traveling, and any development that happens is going to happen on those routes. Now, I've been lucky enough to capitalize on this a couple times, probably about 1997. I purchased a property out in Albertville, Minnesota. If you look on the map, it is way out in the northwest suburbs. And when I was buying out there, I jumped out a good half hour ahead of all the development. I saw what was happening is that this major geographic travel route was leading people in and out of the Minneapolis metro out into that area. So I jumped out ahead, and at the time when I was buying, it was kind of a sleep little town, but they were building shopping malls. They were building on every exit. They were marching out, going further and further west. So I got out in front of it, and I bought my first property for $137,000. I worked on that property a little bit, and then I sold it about 3 years later for about roughly $180,000. So I had, roughly $30,000 to $40,000 of equity that I was able to move to my next property. Then I went out Highway 12 towards Eden Prairie. And if you look on the map again, you'll see, I think it's 212 actually, going out to Eden Prairie. And it was a freeway that was being developed, and it was kind of going out to nothing. Chanhassen was really the biggest developed area. Eden Prairie was coming on, and I bought there again. So I bought there, I took the money from that first sale, I rolled it into the second sale. And I bought there for, I think, $275,000 when it was a dirt road. And 3 years later, I ended up selling that property for $475,000. So now I took $200,000 equity roughly, and I moved it into my next purchase. This time I moved east. I looked at Highway 36 out of Stillwater. It came right to the river and it ended. On the other side of the river, there was Highway 3564 that took off, 4-lane freeway, and it eventually terminated in New Richmond, Wisconsin, but there was nothing connecting it. Well, I knew at some point they were going to build a bridge there, and folks said to me, yeah, good luck with that. They've been talking about that bridge forever, and it's probably never going to happen. Well, I thought it's going to happen because I've seen it happen multiple times. These geographic travel corridors eventually are developed, and lo and behold, they did build that bridge. I have a little video here of it, and now this area where I'm at is jumping up in value. So if you follow those geographic travel corridors, eventually they become demographic travel corridors, which is our next comment on how to find a property. Okay, I misspoke there, but I call it a demographic growth corridor, which follows the geographic travel corridors. A lot of words there. Demographic growth corridors. All those is along those travel routes that we just talked about, development starts to happen. And you'll start to see that as closest to the metro areas and kind of like increasing circles. If you drop a pebble in the water and the circles go out like that, growth happens in the same way. If you can get out in front of that growth a little bit on those demographic growth corridors, the areas that the people want to develop and move and travel, you'll start to see it where these small towns get quick trips or gas stations. They start to get on the exits. You'll start to see gas stations popping up, and then all of a sudden there'll be a strip mall and maybe a housing complex where they'll build some houses, and you can start to see these demographic growth corridors start to happen. Now, this happened in my area. I live in the Holton, Wisconsin area near Somerset and New Richmond, and I saw it here. There was some really nice little towns. They weren't very well connected, but they're all in close proximity, and I started to see the demographics moving this way, and my wife and I jumped out ahead of that, and we bought our property here, I think about 15 years ago. Since that time, we've gained a couple $100,000 in equity as this demographics have moved this way and the development has started to occur. So demographic growth corridors can be key to picking a property if you can get out in front of that development. Okay, so now you've identified the geographic travel routes, you've identified the demographic growth routes, and now where do you buy there? Well, in order to find the best property, you have to get out ahead of the development. You have to, in my opinion, get maybe 30 minutes to an hour from the city center. Those are the areas that are a little cheaper, but the development is coming that way, but it's not overly expensive. There's still an opportunity for that equity gain because this is likely going to be a long hold, and there's lots of topics we could talk about. How long do you have to hold these properties? But I would expect that you want to hold these properties for 10, maybe 15 years, and that growth is going to get to you. So what was once the outer ring where people want to travel at 30-minute commute distance now isn't so far. The Starbucks have showed up, the gas stations, the grocery stores, the health clubs, all the amenities that people want to buy has come out there. So though that 30 minutes to 1 hour ring is going to be cheaper the further you get out and more expensive the closer that you're in. So it all depends on how much time you want to wait, how much money do you have to, are you willing to spend. 30 minutes to an hour, growth rings, that's number 3. Okay, if you go into a big city, and just pick any city where you're at, notice where they put the bus stops, and then notice where people live. People always want to live somewhere between 2 and 5 blocks of a major intersection where there's a bus stop. I think of San Francisco as an example. Nancy Pelosi bought some property, and she kind of had some inside track on what was being developed. The light rails were coming in, and she bought and built and developed property that was 2 to 5 blocks away from these major center hubs. Well, you could take that same lesson and look for these exits and these areas that are being developed and traveled. If you can get 2 to 5 miles away from those areas, that gets a little quieter, life slows down, land gets a little cheaper, you can buy something that you can develop. So that would be key number 4. 2 to 5 miles away from a heavily traveled area, be it an intersection, a freeway exit, a travel corridor, anything like that. That's going to be the sweet spot. That property is going to be the most desirable in the nearest term and the most affordable when you go to buy it. 2 to 5 miles is key. And our 5th tip is transitional land, finding transitional land. Well, what is transitional land? Well, I'm going to bring it back here, and I'm going to actually show some video of this, of some transitional land that I recently purchased, or sold actually. It was ag fields, and it was about a 100-acre farm that was subdivided into 5 parcels. And if you notice from the drone video, you're going to see there's a freeway exit, there's a freeway, and there's a bridge, all within close proximity, 2 to 5 miles of that property. Well, when I first got the call to list this property, I sat down with the sellers and I did my due diligence, and I showed them the market for this property at the current sale price was $5,500 to $7,500 an acre. It was in that close proximity, probably within 10 minutes of millions of people, but it was worlds apart because of the new bridge that came in. When we sat down, we decided to list this property. We actually listed it much higher. We set the market because we were speculating that as development happened, as people moved out of the Twin Cities, this was going to be a very popular property. And we ended up getting an accepted offer on a couple parcels. We're pending on another, and we got 3 more that have yet to sell. But the point here is that this is transitional land. It was farmland, and it was wooded, and it was actually an ag production at the time. But it was transitioning to something else. It was moving away from ag land. The highest and best use was no longer for agricultural. It was for development purposes. People were looking for land, and they were, in their mind's eye and the way they perceived the land, it was transitioning to something else. Although it was zoned ag, it started to look more like development land, and people started dreaming about building their home on it and making little hobby farms, and it was transitioning to something new, even though currently it was in a corn and soybean ag situation, rotation. So a savvy buyer came along and they saw what I saw. They made an offer and they purchased that property above what the ag land prices would be, but above, but probably below what it's going to transition to, and therefore they've got equity. In the years since we did this, they bought that property at about twice what the ag value was, but about $5,000 an acre under what it's now selling just a year later. What a fantastic windfall for those folks. But they saw that speculative opportunity. They saw the transitional land. They saw the demographic travel corridors, growth corridors, and the geographic travel corridors. They saw the exits on a couple layers, 2 to 5 miles away. They saw amenities like golf courses coming in. I mean, all those pieces kind of all came together, and these guys made a windfall. So when you're out looking for property and you're looking for your windfall, that's kind of how you can look at it. Those are 5 ways to start to begin to identify opportunities. If you're looking for property and you're looking to identify something that you think might be one of these transitional properties, a speculative opportunity with great upside, I'd like to be your guy in the land business. You could call me or any of the Whitetail Properties. We'll give you our opinion, because there's so many nuances on these 5 points that maybe I need to make some more videos just to break down each one. But that'll give you a great start. We'd love to talk to you, and I'd like to be your guy in the land business. Hey guys, as always, I'm Neil Hauger. I'm a land specialist with Whitetail Properties Real Estate. If you've never followed this vlog, it's about buying, managing, and selling land, and we talk about all these topics. A lot of them are inspired from you. So if you're interested in having a question answered, just send me a comment. I'll do my best to handle it. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and you've been watching The American Landman.